What I'm going to talk about in this video is how you might feel and how you might be months and even years after the death of your loved one. I talked about there being a sort of 2 to 3 month period of shock, and when that wears off, unfortunately, the deeper pain of grief tends to wash over us. And I think that's because we start to realize that there is an empty space where that person should have been. And the feelings of grief, which can be an absolute multitude, and the thoughts of grief bite quite a bit deeper. And I think that comes at a time actually when people are starting to say things to you like, oh, are you feeling a bit better now? It's been a few months. And what you really want to say back is, are you joking? No, I'm not. I'm actually feeling worse. There are many physical manifestations of grief, and they don't disappear after 3 months. You will continue to feel very tired. Again, you might have bad stomach, you might feel that your eating is all over the place, you might gain weight, you might lose weight over time. You might feel that food tastes like cardboard. You might even have stomach pains, because pain actually can be quite a large part of grief. It is a painful place to be, and it does physically hurt. It hurts our hearts. That's hard, but sometimes misunderstood. And it's not unusual to feel the pain that your loved one felt. That sometimes happens too. You might feel very anxious about all sorts of things, and sometimes that can manifest itself in a larger way in panic attacks. If that's the case, I would really suggest you go and get some help with that from a counsellor or from your doctor, because they're very hard to cope with. But they are actually something that can be treated quite well and can really improve. And sometimes we try to divert ourselves from grief in physical ways. So I mentioned eating too much, but it might be drinking too much alcohol. It might be by over-exercising or under-exercising. It might be taking drugs, prescriptive or non-prescriptive drugs. And something that people don't talk about very much is trying to make yourself feel better by having sex. All of these are completely normal. None of them are unusual. Many people will find all sorts of clever ways to divert themselves from their grief. Emotionally, I want to say that absolutely any feeling you could name is part of grief. Absolutely anything will be part of grief. You might feel that you're depressed, you might feel that you're in bed too much, or that you're having too many duvet days, that you're missing intimacy with your partner, you're missing your sexual life. That's very painful, and people don't talk about that very much either. Of course it's normal to miss that, of course. You might feel that you're going mad, you know, like, this just isn't me, I don't feel like myself. That's again actually one of the most common feelings that people have. Maybe feeling abandoned by people, feeling nobody can help you, feeling very alone and isolated. Those are very difficult feelings, but not unusual. It can be really hard to go back to work. Sometimes people feel it's a good thing, but sometimes they feel they can't cope with it, that it's too early, that their workplace hasn't given them enough bereavement time, and often that is true, they haven't. And that is a hurdle to overcome, and I think that Sometimes people need help to get back to work. Some companies are better than others. And those feelings, those difficult feelings of longing and yearning for the person you love, that's such a physical feeling in your heart. It's brings up a lot of sadness, and of course there's nothing to do with it. Sometimes people feel guilt, the what ifs or the if onlys, if only I'd done this, only done that, if only I'd said this or that. This is very hard to cope with as well, because there's not that much that you can do to make it better, because that time has gone by. But sometimes writing a letter to the person you love to express how you feel, even though you'll obviously never send it, can be really helpful. And sometimes people feel very anxious that somebody else in the family will die. That's a very common feeling. A lot of people do feel that way, but it will pass in time. So practically, there are so many things that have to be done after a death. There's paperwork, as I called it, death admin. There are many things to sort out. There's often a home to sort out. There's often a lot of banking, lots of registration, certificates, maybe lots of business things to sort out. That can take up quite a lot of time. But at some point that comes to an end. And that in itself can be quite hard, because what else do I have to do for the person I love now? Things like a change in circumstances, perhaps financial, things like coming home to an empty house at night is something that people find very difficult. Not going into certain rooms in the house, or certain places in the house, or sitting in a certain chair where your loved one sat, can present difficulties. Sometimes people sleep downstairs on the sofa rather than go up to the bedroom to bed. And that can last actually quite a long time. So they're all normal. These are all normal things. Feeling like you don't want to go out and socialise, and especially that you might get trapped at a party or you can't get away. I always say that the bereaved need a let-out clause at all times to say, no, I don't want to do that. Gosh, I want to go home now. I need to go home now. That's normal too. There are many social implications in grief that people don't think about very much, like the first birthday, the first anniversary, the first Christmas, the first Eid, whatever celebration it is without your loved one is hard. And actually the second is really hard too. And that's something that I don't think people always understand, that the second year of grief sometimes can be harder than the first. Not always, it just depends. But bear it in mind, because it isn't just the first of everything that grieving people find difficult. Sometimes people avoid you, and I think that's because usually they don't know what to say to you when you're grieving. And one thing that I've told my clients over the years is that that's all about them and not about you. They don't know what to say, and so they avoid you. And there is a saying in grief that it rearranges your address book. And you may find that people that you have not expected to be helpful or thoughtful or understanding are very kind and patient and keep in touch and support you. You just never know which way it's going to go. You might feel that no one wants to hear your grief, or that it's too much for them to bear. I would encourage you to try and trust people, that they will be there to support you. You might feel you're never going to go on holiday again, or that you've lost your best friend. These are very painful feelings, very painful thoughts. And you want to feel normal, but nothing feels normal. And in addition to all of this, I'm afraid there is often a change in your identity, in all sorts of ways. So people might say, well, I was a wife. What am I now if I don't have a husband and I'm not married? Or my child died. Am I still a mother? Am I still a father? These sort of changes are actually very big in somebody's life. And what does it mean? And how will I find my new place in this new world where I am without the one I love? So one's identity takes quite a battering in grief, and slowly you will find your way to a new identity for yourself. And spiritually, how might you feel? Sometimes people's faith takes a battering, and sometimes people's faith can be something that absolutely sustains them. But I think most people would say, how could this possibly have happened to me? Why me? Why did this happen? And how are you going to make meaning out of what happened? We do need meaning, and stories are very, very important. And if you go over those stories a lot in your mind, that's a very lovely way of trying to find your way to a new place and to make a spiritual meaning of what's happened. Sometimes people like to make an altar or a table of precious things that belong to their loved one. It's a really nice thing to do, and it can be a meaningful place to, say, light a candle each day, or as you walk by you think of them. So do that if you feel called to do it. Does music help you connect with that person? A lot of people find reliving songs that they enjoyed together or beautiful pieces of music bring comfort. And honouring yourself and your grief is a way to stay connected to the person that you loved. And our grief is precious to us. We need it. We need to be connected to the person that we have lost. And I really want to reiterate that grief has no timeline. There is no set time. People often ask me during counselling, how long is this going to last? Each grief has its own landscape and its own timing, and we don't know what that is. But I will say that it is absolutely normal to grieve for a number of years if you need to. That is not abnormal. Joan Didion, the playwright, called the first year of grief in her book the magical thinking, the year of magical thinking. And what she was really saying is that in that first year you still expect the person to come back because you're just used to having them around. But in time, we do get used to the fact that that person we love isn't there. And your job within your grief is to move forward one step at a time, one day at a time, 1 week at a time, towards a life where it becomes normal that the person you love is not there. And that will happen, I promise you, it will happen, but in small, small steps so that we don't almost notice it. But at all times we carry the person we love in our heart. So they are with us, but we carry them inside of us. They are not outside of us. And I like to think of that as the new normal.